CES is just around the corner. John is already salivating over some of the OLED news that's been leaks ahead of the show. I'm going to go to you first, John, and what you are excited about. And I guess we could start with the CES stuff.
Sure, yeah, we'll start with the CES stuff. So one of the first things to come out of this was that LG has more OLEDs in the pipeline. Big surprise, right? Every time you get to CES, they roll out the new OLEDs, and we finally got a look at what they're doing for 2024. So on the TV side, they have the four models, the M series, the G series, C series, and the B series. Similar to last year, the M and Gs, the G4 and the M4, I guess, those feature the micro lens array technology. Up to I think it's the 83-inch now has this capabilities, which is the largest one they've done yet. So the MLA basically it does allow them to push a higher peak brightness than prior OLEDs, and it is basically their highest end panel right now. And I've seen this with the G3 already, and it's pretty stunning. And looking at the lineup here, it does start to make me think, like, should I replace the CX back there, the one with Richard's eye, with the G4?
Oh gosh.
I'm wondering, like, and I'm also curious if I want to go with this time. I don't know. Could I fit a 77-inch G4 back there?
What? Oh my gosh, John.
I don't know. I'm thinking about it. Like, it may.
Well,
the only thing keeping me back right now is that the CX still has that, like, absolutely super high end black frame insertion that is just gone. On the newer ones. Like, it's still, the BFI is enabled for 60 hertz only, and the 60 hertz BFI is worse than it was on the CX. So that's like the main thing that's keeping me on the CX for now, is just because I do like using that with side-scrolling games. So we'll see, though. The thing that's a bummer, of course, still is that the C and the B line do not get any access to this new technology, which means if you wanted to, say, buy the 42-inch C4 OLED, I've been using the C2 here on my desk as a monitor, and it's the best monitor I've ever owned. And I think you guys have been using OLEDs as monitors as well. And I think you would agree that they're really good monitors. Even as a TV, they work really well as a monitor.
Yeah.
Especially when paired with that LG companion app. Have you guys used that?
No, not yet, because I've been keeping things very standard. I only recently just got the service remote to turn off all the eye strain stuff. So I'm a little bit lagging behind here.
Well, but either way, new TVs coming along. The thing that I'm really wondering about is that they were pushing this, like, with this new A11 chip, they'll be pushing lots of AI enhancements, AI and picture enhancements. And they've done this before. I can't say I'm exceptionally excited by it, but I am curious to see if it actually does get to the point where it can actually enhance things, you know?
Yeah, it's been spotty, hasn't it?
It's been very spotty in the past. And it's not, the problem is with a TV, of course, is that when dealing with the imagery displayed on it, it's all spatial data, right? All it has is what's input into the HDMI port. So the reason, like, games with frame generation, for instance, they have access to motion vectors, right? Not so here. So we'll see what happens there. Oh, I did forget to mention another thing that they've added this year is support for 144 hertz input at the top end, which I don't know why 144 was settled upon I guess it's like, if you go, it's 24 up from 120, so you still get that evenly divisible 24 frames per second playback.
Yeah.
But for 60 hertz videos and just general usage, I still think 120 is adequate. But still, any extra refresh rate there is a benefit. But that's not the only OLED LG has in the pipeline. They actually showed off, and while this is way too small for my use, I find it interesting. There's a 1440p LG OLED monitor with 480 hertz refresh rate, which is the fastest that exists right now. And you might be saying, like, what is the point of this, John? Like, what are you going to run at 480 frames per second?
Esports.
Well, yes, esports. But I'm actually thinking more to what when discussing motion clarity with Mark from Blur Busters. He's continued to sort of, from what I remember, he suggested that once you get to around 1,000 hertz on an update for a modern monitor like this, with sample and hold rather than using sort of strobing, you can actually match the CRT quality motion, like basically perfect motion clarity. So this could rely on things like frame generation perhaps to get there, or some other techniques, or just lower end games. But either way, it's creating this headroom to finally really get that sort of motion clarity we've been craving natively without relying on any sort of additional trickery. So 480 hertz is about halfway there.
Yeah, I know. And like
Right?
here, that like the reason why that's good is because you're going to maintain peak brightness. You're going to presumably maintain all the goodness of HDR. I mean, the one issue about all these things is, other than esports, the biggest thing actually isn't a GPU limitation. You could probably drive with DLSS 1440p in a GPU limited scenario up to 400 FPS in a surprising amount of games. I would actually imagine, but the deal is your CPU is going to get in the way extremely, extremely quickly. And so that's the one issue with my utility with these things, is that they become VRR displays where you never hit the top level VRR, so you're never V-syncing, but you're always free, like free floating below. Which I don't know. I'm kind of a fan of that. At the same time, I'm really not, because like you can still, like Rich has seen this before, like between like 240 and like 120 hertz, you can feel like a smoothness difference and see it. But like excess of that, it's like it's really hard to actually see usually for most arc movement.
I mean, I tested right up to 240 hertz at 4K with Samsung Odyssey G8, Neo G8, and basically. It's the differences. It's when you have these wild swings between frame rates that you actually notice the difference. So, if you suddenly go from like 240 to, 120, you can tell the difference. But if it's a gradual change in performance, it's a lot more difficult to tell. And north of 165 hertz, I struggle to tell any difference at all. If your game is operating in a sort of 165 to 240 hertz window, found that quite difficult to actually tell any difference at all. But that's with like AAA fare. When you're talking about esports, I'm sure there's going to be people out there up in arms about this outrageous difference in performance levels. But that's where I'm sitting there. I mean, I think ultimately what's going to happen is, probably will get to 1,000 hertz, and it's going to be frame gen that's going to be basically doing the heavy lifting to get us there. And I don't think anybody is. In fact, wasn't it the case when we were talking to AMD at Gamescom that, Nick from AMD was basically saying that the end game is to just match the refresh rate of the display.
Right. Full V-synced refresh rate at that point, which does actually make sense, I think, instead of relying on variable like refresh rate at that point in time, because then it simplifies a lot of things in the engine side where you don't have to necessarily solve for certain things.
You know how much time you have per frame, and it's kind of fixed.
Yeah,
absolutely. What's this about an ultra-wide 5K, John?
So I wanted to mention this, even though everything thankfully is shifting towards OLED now, which, that's great. But Dell also announced this ultra-wide 5K LCD monitor, and I wanted to highlight it because prior to switching to OLED on the desk, I was using a 38-inch LG ultra-wide, which was a 3840 by 1600 resolution monitor. And for the longest time, I sort of complained about the fact that nobody was making large ultra-wide displays anymore with decent resolution. Almost universally, they were 3440 by 1440 or lower, which I didn't think was good enough. For gaming, that's totally fine. But for actual productivity work, for Premiere like we use, it's not enough. And Dell did just announce a 4K ultra-wide monitor that is 5120 by 2160.
That's perfect.
And I think that's awesome, because that means you can fit a full 3840 by 2160 image within the center of it, but you get more pixels on the side. It's going to look insanely sharp. It also has a peak brightness of 600 nits, which is surprising for sort of a desktop LCD. So while I fully expect it to struggle from the typical LCD problems, the black levels are going to be poor, no doubt. The motion's probably going to be worse, unless it has some sort of, mitigation strategy for that. But I you know, for LCD users, I wanted to highlight it for that reason, because it is something that I had been looking for in the past, and I'm happy that somebody finally delivered a monitor like this, because I still do love the ultra-wide format, and it is great. It's just, it was those low resolutions that were really killing it for productivity. But man, 5120 by 2160, that is a ton of pixels to draw, to drive. But I'd love to see what that monitor can do. And also worth finally mentioning, nothing too exciting here, but I guess Samsung also announced more OLED monitors, which is great. So some of their Odyssey monitors, it is a trio. It's the 49-inch curved ultra wide. They've been doing those massive format, like mega ultra. Like what is it? What is that even called at this point?
I have no idea.
It's beyond
32
ultra wide
by something, isn't it? 32.
It's like 32 by 9, because it's basically two 16 by 9 screens side by side. Yeah, and it is immersive, right? You've used one before, Rich, right?
Yeah, I've used one. It's not for me though.
No. Though the problem with them has always been resolution as well, because it's you get that wide resolution, and that doesn't seem to have changed here, because it's 5120 by 1440.
Yeah, I'm also, one thing I'm a little about ultra wides, and curvature is a part of it too, is that when you play first person games, the way FOV is calculated can lead to that extra information you're getting on your sides to being warped visually, which depending upon what you're into, that could both look not great and great, because like you're looking at just a 2D panel and it's conveying a 3D world. That means the sides on a constrained FOV are going to start going like, woo, people are going to getting really tall and wide or something like that. And I've always kind of not liked the way it looks, other than for just being peripheral vision. But if you have like a game that maps UI to the top right and top left where you're looking often, maybe, then you'll start noticing it a bit. And I've never been a really huge fan of it, even though it is interesting, like you're saying, John.
Yeah. Also noticed, well, it does support some pretty high refresh rates, which is nice. It looks like the ultra wide one goes up to 240 hertz, and then they have a 27-inch monitor with 360 hertz. The big thing I'm seeing that's kind of a downer is that even though these are OLED displays, they're advertised, for what I'm seeing here, as HDR 400, which I don't understand, because I don't classify that as actual HDR. And they can say, with VESA display HDR True Black 400. And
True Black 400.
I just don't. That actually kind of leads me on just a tiny micro rant. There was some discussion around HDR recently online, and I noticed that a fair number of people were down on it. And digging deeper, the impression I get is that a lot of people have purchased displays that claim to support HDR, and it's usually HDR 400 as it's called. And they're just not good enough at it. And there's beyond the lack of brightness, they also have uniform backlights without any sort of local dimming, because they're LCDs, of course. At least here, this will be OLED, so you get proper black levels, so it should look better than usual, but it's basically not the true HDR experience. And I think you need to get to around 800 nits, and once you get there or above, and the more you go above that, it gets even better. I think it actually produces a pleasing HDR experience. But I think 400 has negatively colored people's impressions of HDR, because the manufacturers basically don't explain it very well, and you think it's an HDR monitor, but in reality it can't deliver the performance you'd expect from HDR. And I think they've simply poisoned the well on that, and it should not be there. So
no,
I don't. On the flip side, you've got Steam Deck HDR OLED, which is an exceptionally good.
Oh yeah, that's true.
On a mainstream device.
That's great news.
Hopefully, will sort of be a fixing experience for a lot of people to actually see what HDR is really about. Because when you see that in action, it is like a little mini LG TV in your hands. It's absolutely fantastic.